morning. Let me tell you a story about a fellow called Joe. Joe grew up in a somewhat dysfunctional probably household. There was his mum and his stepdad, and there were conflicts and stuff between him and his stepdad, and his mum sort of moved between, and it wasn't always easy. Joe was fairly smart, bright young kid who was a bit hyperactive and often spoke before he thought, and got himself into a bit of bother with kids in the school and teachers and whoever. Joe walked around or drifted around the outside group. He was never part of the in crowd. He never quite felt he belonged. He was somewhat lonely. Afternoons he spent mainly at home by himself, waiting for mum or stepdad to get home from work. And life, with all its attendant struggles and anxieties and confusion of growing up, was also lonely for Joe. He spent most of his afternoons lulled by TV, watching TV shows and escaping into other worlds and other places, dreaming of other possibilities of who he could be and what could happen in life. The advertising that happened in between these TV shows really further enhanced that subconscious or even conscious sense that things weren't good for him, that there was another life out there that he could be living. Anyway, TV was the first distraction in his addicted lifestyle. And as he got older, there were others. He discovered the not-so-well-hidden girly magazines of his stepdad, and that gave him moments of pleasure or whatever, distraction elsewhere. Took him into another world. And then there was alcohol, the cupboards filled with alcohol that he gradually started to consume more and more. And some of the things he took in gave him instant pleasure and intense experiences, and others kind of numbed him and lulled him and quelled the pain of his life. And drugs became part of his distractions, his addictions that helped him deal with the pain and anxieties that were growing in his life, of relationships and moving between different people and jobs that were boring or non-stimulating or where he didn't function well at. Joe's life basically spiraled downwards out of control. There were a group of people around him who saw the real Joe in there somewhere, and it came out at moments, and they loved him for that. And they cared for him, and they pushed him into treatment programs when things were looking pretty dire for him. He responded for a time and then got lulled further back into his spiral of addictions. He finally got into one program, and the director there confronted him and said, "Joe, if you don't take this seriously this time, it's your last chance. You've been in and out of here, there's no more chances. In fact, I'll tell you now, if you don't take this seriously, in 6 months or a year's time, I'll be going to your funeral." And I don't know whether it was an apocalyptic moment of openness, but something changed for Joe, and he began to engage in the processes, particularly a 12-step program which he'd put off because he could never get past those first couple of steps of admitting the problem was with him, was in him, that it was his issue, his problem, not the world's. He blamed everyone else, but finally had to come to accept that the problem was with him. Anyway, he went through programs and kept ongoing with them, and a community of AA and NA and others around him journeyed with him and he with them, and he got off the drugs and mainly off the alcohol. There were a couple of relapses, but still his life was not meaningful or happy. There were failed relationships. He was sick of waking up in some strange woman's bed wondering who she was or how he got there, or having a strange woman wake up in his, of relationships that would go so far and then bust open, and jobs that came and went. And anyway, one day he was away with his current job. He was at work and out of town for meetings with part of the company, and he was in a motel room at night, hard day, and conflicts, and he'd said things that upset people, and he was fairly despairing. He felt a bit claustrophobic in his room, so he went out for a walk and got something to eat. He wasn't hungry. He felt lost, alienated, lonely, desperate. He passed a church, and it was an old church, and out the back there was some sort of hall and people coming and going, and it looked familiar, and he saw the sign, AA meeting, 7 o'clock, 10 past 7. Why not? I understand that group of people, and they'll understand me. There'll be people around me. So he went in and sat in the circle, and they were sharing their life stories in the way he was familiar with. When it came to him, he started, I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I've been off the drugs for 3 years, and mainly off the grog for a couple of years. I've had a couple of relapses. It's a day-by-day experience. He went into his spiel, and then all of a sudden he just stopped. He couldn't go on. The regular words just wouldn't come, and he was filled with emotion and despair. And he just sat with his head in his hands, and then the words flowed, and so did the tears. He shared his failed relationships, his lack of love or ability to love, his loneliness for a meaningful relationship, his abuse of friendships, how he treated people, how he was always trying to please people, or say the right thing, or be clever, or applauded, or put on the right persona, dress in the right clothes, drive the right car, everything, and nothing worked. And as he sat there, the people gathered around him, and they laid hands on him, just touched him, and they prayed. They prayed for him in their own way. Some who'd had the experience of the higher power, and they knew the name, and they called it God, and there was some maybe faith experience as part of that. Some who experienced God but didn't have a name, and they just prayed. They prayed for him and they held him. But they didn't try and distract him or say, this, it's going to be okay, Joe. You'll be right. Don't worry, she'll be right. No. They knew from their experience that Joe had to go through his pain, that he had to embrace it and embrace his failure, this pretense, this superficial facade he was building up, this me he was trying to project to the world, had to die. He had to die in order for the Joe inside, the real Joe, to be able to emerge. They understood that you had to die in order to rise to new life, to be reborn. And it's this story we keep hearing reflected in Jesus' story, his own story. And this week in Mark's Gospel, in chapter 8, we read from a section that's bounded by two stories of healing stories. Two people who are blind, who are healed of their blindness. And in that, Mark is saying that you need to be healed of your blindness. The blindness that doesn't allow you to see the way of God, but the blindness that causes you to see through the lens of culture and nation, politics and belief systems and religion and family and all the other bits and pieces. You need to be healed of this blindness in order to see more truly and deeply who you are and who God is and how you work in there, how you fit. Jesus takes his disciples north to Caesarea Philippi, a religious and political kind of town. And he asks them the question, who do you say that I am? And Peter just blurts out, you're the Messiah. And Jesus says, yeah, good, well done, Peter. Top of the class, top marks, well done. And then he goes on to say, we're going now to Jerusalem. And there, the religious leaders there will arrest me, they'll try me, they'll charge me and hand me over to the Romans, who will crucify me. And on the third day I'll rise again. And the disciples they're just been, what? Shocked. And we can't overstate the shocking nature of this statement, because they've just spent 3 years with this guy who's taught and preached and the most profound and wondrous teachings, grabbed people, and they've held him, and they've been transformed. There's been healings and exorcisms and all the rest. They've seen the hope and the possibility in Jesus, and now he's going to die. It's like, you're sitting in the doctor's room and suddenly he says, well, I hate to tell you, but you have a terminal illness. Or we get the news that someone we know or love is sick or dead, or or someone walks out of our life, or the boss comes in and says, pack your stuff, you're sacked. You know, that news that just changes our life in an instant. That's what it was for them. But more than that, Jesus has just admitted to being the Messiah, and Peter takes him aside and says, but hang on, you've just said you're the Messiah. Don't you understand? The Messiah is this political, religious leader that under God who's going to restore the fortunes of Israel, bring back the armies, and we're going to fight the Romans and kick them out and restore the glory and power of Israel. It's a way of violence and warfare and armies and victory and power and might. And Jesus says, Peter, get behind me, Satan. You have no idea what you're talking about. They're the things of human beings. That's your belief systems and your cultural conditioning and all the other stuff. It's not the way of God. He goes on, he says, if anyone wants to follow me and be a disciple of me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. Whoever tries to hold and control and save their lives will lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake and the good news of God's reign, you'll find it. And that's exactly what Joe was experiencing in that group and in that journey. That he had to actually let go of this persona, this false identity that's formed and formed in the world and its culture and nationalism and politics and family stuff and belief systems and all the other bits and pieces. When we think that we can buy the right thing, the latest, greatest gadget, or wear the right clothes, or have the right hairdo, or have all the right curves and bumps and bulges in the right places, and look like Mr. or Mrs. Universe, or have the right career, or the right education, or the right, more money, and be successful, however we measure success, drive the right. Whenever we can put on these things or do these things, we will have made it. Well, no. It's just more addictions. It's just more stuff we're piling up around ourselves. And it will just give us more grief because it's not the way of life. And so self-denial is about denying this false image of ourselves that we build up in order to please others and satisfy our own egos or the world around us or be popular or powerful or whatever. It's denying that stuff and allowing it to die, to fade away, in order that the real self, the new self, the self that's created in God can emerge. And taking up our cross is to stand in that place with Christ, with God. That's often counter to the world, that has its own systems and beliefs and cultures and violence and all the other stuff attendant to it, instead of walking in this way of love and justice and peace. And we'll cop the conflict from that because they don't like people who don't abide by their systems. Saving our lives, trying to control and own and have our lives and save them, will mean we lose them like Joe. He tried to hold it and hang on to it, and it just sucked him into a deeper system. His is more obvious than most of us, but we all have our own addictions and ways in which we try and please others and be popular or acceptable or belong or whatever. And Jesus is saying, let go of that. Let go of it, because when you try and save your life and hold it like that, you're going to lose it. But when you lose your life, give it up, die. For me and the sake of God's reign, you'll find life and everything it offers. Because that's my way. And that's the way of God. And that's really what Joe found in his experience and many, many others, particularly through 12-step programs and through good religious programs, through therapies and all sorts of things. But when we open ourselves to let go and find this way in God, we will find the life that Jesus offers us. And that's what this journey of Lent invites us into. Amen.
you.